welcome to a new and long overdue installment of my Story Behind series. When it comes to doing these, I have to dedicate a lot of time and focus on them. I have to do my research, gather information, compile it all together into a cohesive story that is as close to the truth as I can make it based on what is available to me. I have to proofread it 50 times, and basically it is a very time-consuming process, so I need to be in the right headspace for it. My last installment was on the story behind Hannibal Lecter, and after some time to think, I settled on today's topic, which is the story behind The Entity. The Entity is a 1982 American supernatural horror film directed by Sidney J. Furie and written by Frank DeFelitta, adapted from DeFelitta's 1978 novel of the same name. Both the novel and film are based on the 1974 case of Doris Bither, a woman who claimed to have been repeatedly sexually assaulted by an invisible entity. In the 1970s, single mother Doris Bither, born in Illinois, was living on Braddock Street in Culver City, California, with her 4 sons, all born to different fathers. Bither had moved with her family from Santa Monica in order to start a new life. Bither's introduction to the supernatural began at a very young age, when she would find herself often playing with a Ouija board as a form of escape from her highly traumatic childhood. Disowned as a teenager, she went on to suffer through a series of abusive relationships and was even a recovering alcoholic. While making the steps to start a better life for herself and her children, things were far from easy. Bither was broke, and she and her sons were living in very poor conditions, with their home being condemned twice. Sadly, Bither's attempts at a better life were about to encounter some more devastating and unpredictable hurdles. Shortly after moving to Culver City, Bither received a visit from an elderly Mexican lady who ominously informed her, "You need to get out. I used to live here in this old house back when it was just a farm and I was a little girl. There is something very evil here. This place is haunted and you need to get out." The woman in question left Bither with this warning and was never to be seen again. Just a few short months after the lady's visit, classic signs of poltergeist activity began to occur around the home. Lights turning on and off, objects moving of their own accord, and bizarre noises, with each experience being witnessed by the entire family. This soon escalated to the appearance of apparitions around the home. It first began small, that movement you catch in the corner of your eye, to shadowy figures moving across the room. From here, the experiences in the home continued to manifest. Soon it wasn't just family members seeing these apparitions, even neighbors began to see things move around the house that definitely wasn't the residents. The figures quickly began to take shape, like fog-like humanoid shapes that would wander about or sit in the corner and observe the family. Over time, it became apparent that the family was experiencing more than one entity. Bither herself claimed there to be 3, while her middle son Brian Harris claimed there were 4. Over time, the entities in question became more violent and aggressive, no longer content to just sit in the corner and observe. Family members reported being shoved, clawed, and bitten. One son was slapped by an unseen hand in the middle of the night, and another recalled bumping into an invisible person in the hallway. As the attacks continued, it seemed the entities in question became more focused on Doris, and soon she became the primary target. What began as pushing, scratching, and biting grew into full-blown assault, where at one point Doris recalls 2 entities holding her down while the third raped her, and instances such as this would continue. Sometimes Doris's children would listen to the assault and their mother screams from their rooms. In other instances, the assaults happened right before their eyes. Bither's middle son, during one interview, stated, "The whole rape thing was real. My room was right next door to my mother's. I would hear the attacks happening. Things being thrown, her screaming. Then she would come out of the bedroom and have all these bruises on her legs, her inner thighs. There were times where we would see it happen in front of us. It was like if a man was standing in front of my mother and would start to beat her. Imagine a woman being beaten. You could see her being picked up and thrown around. Sounds, slaps, but there was no one there to actually do it. We all felt it too. Pulling, biting, and scratching. We were all attacked." As the attacks continued day and night, growing more vicious, the family took note of one entity bigger than the others, and soon it was given the nickname Mr. Who's It. In 1974, desperate for help, Bither turned to Dr. Barry Taff, a doctor in psychophysiology, a biomedical engineer, and a world-renowned parapsychologist. This all occurred when one day at a local bookstore, Bithers overheard a conversation between Taff and an associate where he was discussing his most recent case. It was at this moment Bither approached Taff and requested his help. Though over the years many have claimed to be part of the investigation or even worked in the lab during this time, Dr. Taff has debunked all these claims, stating that it was only ever parapsychologist Kerry Gaynor, the head of the UCLA parapsychology lab at the time, Thelma Moss, and himself, who worked on the case. No more, no less. On August 22nd, 1974, the parapsychology team entered the home and began their investigation. They began by examining Bither and her many injuries that covered her body, from bruises to scratches and scars from healed wounds. Listening to Bither recount her assaults, the team set up their equipment to best gather any and all evidence they could of a haunting. They began by having Bither enter the room plagued by the most activity and instruct her to antagonize the entities in an attempt to draw them out. Without barely missing a beat, the investigator caught intense orb activity. The investigator recalled seeing Bither enveloped in a greenish mist. This was then followed by the materialization of what looked to be the upper torso of a man. The figure was supposedly so terrifying, one of the investigators fainted. While this image was not caught on camera, photographs taken of Bither showed a strange arc of light appearing over her. The investigation continued for several months, with many instances such as this being documented. More apparitions and lights, unexplained smells, moving objects, and drops in temperature. It quickly became evident that the presence of the investigators was angering the entities in question, and they even noted the music by Black Sabbath also seemed to result in increased activity. Hard to say if that meant the entities were fans or not. Over the years, Bither would relocate her family, but each time the entities that had plagued her would follow her wherever she went, but she noted them seeming weaker. Bither had claimed that one of the entities had impregnated her, but there was never any evidence to back this claim. Doris Bither passed away in 1999 at the age of 59 from respiratory failure, leaving behind an infamous story and many questions, the most important of which being, did this all really happen? Based on extensive study and research, Dr. Barry Taff theorizes that what Bither's family endured was not the act of spirits, ghosts, or demons, but was still real paranormal phenomena, but of a different variety. Taff went on to state, "The evidence and collected data suggest these effects are the result of what's called recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK. There's two types of psychokinesis, moving physical objects around without physical means. There's microscopic, which works on very small scales, things like affecting random number generators, random event generators, and moving subatomic particles around. It's usually electrostatic based. Fatigue in the individual is shown as it's done on a conscious level. And then there's macroscopic, what we call poltergeist, and that's a whole different ball of wax. We're talking about the ability of moving very massive objects hundreds of pounds easily. It's done on a subconscious level, as there is no fatigue seen in the person at the core of it. Like the microscopic type, it's believed that the phenomena are generated by a living human agency." Taff is of the belief that what happened to this family occurred essentially at its own hand, that the combination of traumas and hardships endured by Bithers and her children resulted in subconscious psychokinetic activity that took on a very real and very violent form that targeted its own creators, who were none the wiser. While some, who weren't even there, disagree and believe it to be demonic activity, something Bither's son Harris is still very much a firm believer of, others believe it was the imagination of a woman with a fractured mind. Taff himself cannot say with 100% certainty what happened to this family, and to this day still wishes he could interview Bithers one last time and finally truly understand what happened, and if her past history and substance abuse did play a hand in the events she and her son suffered through. This case went on to be called the entity haunting and has over the years gained so much media attention, and cult phenomena is what it has become. Obviously, as I've mentioned, it became a book and then it became a film. One of these days I'm sure they'll probably reboot it or turn it into a TV series, as that is what people love to do. Hell, it might even become a comic book series. But as is the way with stories, it has evolved, it has taken on a life of its own, it has become its own kind of folk tale or urban legend, and people have come out of the woodworks to either claim to be a part of the story and that not being true, or claiming that they're a psychic who, know something, or just taking the story and morphing it like it's this never-ending game of Chinese whispers. But at the end of the day, there is a real story. There were real people who endured something that they may never 100% ever completely understand what happened to them. Even if parapsychologists came in and tried to give you answers, it's not really answers. You're going to get a theory of what the answer is, but you're never going to completely know. The family in question will always remember what they went through. They may not know whether it was demonic, whether it was psychokinetic, or was it all in their heads? Was it a kind of shared psychosis of some kind? Not that that's never happened before, it certainly has, but no one can be sure. But it doesn't matter whether it's supernatural or psychological, it was still very, very real, and I can only feel sympathy and compassion for the people who went through this, thinking of this poor woman who had suffered so much in her life, and the universe just putting her through even more, and these poor children who were watching and experiencing things that no doubt as a child would have absolutely terrified them and made them feel so helpless. And I think that's the part of the story that really gets to me, is how helpless these people would have felt. Even if you had parapsychologists coming in, it's not like they made it go away. You know, Bithers stated that it didn't matter when she moved and she bounced around, she still felt that these things were following her and tormenting her, that it had kind of latched onto her, so to speak. And I'd say it's quite possible that her middle son, Mr. Harris, he seems to, in his own time, dealt with his own substance abuse issues. But as I've read interviews where he was talking in interviews, he seems to still feel very traumatized by what happened and feels very protective of the memory of his mother, and one cannot really blame him for that. All the children have a different turn of events, but that's goes for anything. I think that makes everything all the more authentic and less like here's a story we made up. Because if an accident happens and you go and talk to all the people in the crowd are going to have a completely different account of events. So it makes complete sense and feels very honest to me that each of the children remember something different, but the one thing that they all have in common is that they remember experiencing invisible entities hurting them, or seeing things moving of their own that they just couldn't explain. And ultimately, this is a very interesting story, but it's also very sad because it, technically speaking, didn't have a happy ending. It didn't really have an ending at all. I ask myself and wonder, do the sons ever, any of them, still experience something? Do they ever feel like this thing that tormented them when they were children, does it still linger? I wonder if Doris Bither was still experiencing attacks or some type of phenomena until the day she died, but we will never know. But that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. It's nice to be getting back into one of these stories. It took a while for me to find which one I wanted to talk about next, and then try and gather the correct set of information that I was able to find. There are numerous podcasts and articles out there, but a lot of them do contradict each other, which I do tend to find happens a lot. So it's hard to try and track down the one that seems to be the most consistent. Luckily, I actually found a few interviews with the people who actually did experience it, and that was a big help. But I know I don't release installments of this series very often, but I am going to try and be doing more of these this year. Just depends on finding the right ones that really kind of spark me to dive in and, you know, start doing the research. But I love doing this series. I love researching stories behind these fictional characters and movies that have, you know, really captured audiences' attentions, and finding out that there is a really dark, sinister, true story that lies behind it. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, you can give it a thumbs up, let me know that you liked it, or you can comment down below and share your thoughts on it. As always, thank you to my amazing patrons. I appreciate your support, and you can all wish me luck in bringing you more story behind videos as the year rolls forward. So until next time, bye!